It. You know, I remember a time when I couldn't even sit through this movie. It scared me so much. Now, it's actually more of a guilty pleasure. Horror has always fascinated me. Admittedly, there was a time when it just flat out frightened me, but over time that grew into fascination. But all in all, it's a very strange genre, not just because of the type of people it takes to think up some of this stuff, but because of how absolutely just across the board it is. I mean, there's 10,000 different ways to look at horror. There's so many subgenres, so many debates about it. People are constantly arguing over what is and isn't a horror movie. It really is pretty fascinating. So, that's what this vlog is about. Just kind of my take on the horror genre, my feelings on how everything goes with that particular area of film. And not even necessarily just film, just in general, what makes horror so unique as a genre. I think one of the things that always really interests me the most is when you see people debating about what is, like I was saying before, what is and isn't a horror movie. Back in the day, everyone considered Silence of the Lambs to be just a true blue horror movie, but as time's gone on, people look at it more of a psychological thriller, even with the hugely gory, bloody scenes it has in it. And then you have something on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, like Saw, that people argue isn't even horror anymore, it just goes into the realm of torture porn. And, I mean, you look at all this different stuff, all the different ways people look at horror and all the different debates about what is and isn't a horror movie. And I think, at the end of the day, what makes a horror movie is when something's trying to frighten you. When something's trying to present you with something so disturbing that you leave the movie with this feeling of dread. That's interesting to me, when that idea that literally something is created to make you feel dread. And that's one of the things that you really have to look at when you're writing horror or you're looking at horror, is that you have to remember people like being scared. It's a concept that I think people don't always fully embrace, but it's true. People like to be frightened. I mean, as a kid, I would always read Goosebumps or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, stuff like that, because even back then, I liked being scared. I understood the concept of fear, and I loved it. And I mean, there's a reason those books are so popular. Kids like being frightened. They like the strange and surreal. So, and that comes true for just a lot of things. There's something about the way fear gets your adrenaline pumping that people just love, and myself included. And what makes horror so unique is the 10,000 different ways that can be achieved. Is that there's honestly probably more subgenres in horror than any other genre there is. I mean, like I said, there's psychological horror. There's like the stuff that gets more into the torture porn area. There's the slasher films. There's the thrillers. There's just everything in between. To the point where people even debate what a horror movie is, so it's absolutely fascinating. And again, there's just the way that horror can be melded into virtually any genre. Bone Tomahawk mixed westerns with horror movies. There's something you think about right away. Things like Sweeney Todd and Little Shop of Horrors made a musical horror comedy. Who thinks of this? It's such a strange meld. The way that horror can be brought into anything, the way that we're always fascinated when something we wouldn't associate with horror is put into horror. I mean, look at all the films, games, books, and stuff popping up that, like, take something that tends to be more of kind of a little kiddie, something that's usually more just sweet and friendly, and turning it into something horrifying. We're instantly fascinated when something like that comes out, every time. So, I mean, you look at all this stuff and you have to wonder, I mean, where does the essence of all this lie? Why is it that we like being frightened so much? Well, I mean, part of it is like what I said before, where we just love to get our blood pumping. We love that adrenaline. But I think part of that stems from just the idea that we like to challenge ourselves. We like to be able to say, that we sat through an entire horror movie, and we like to look at someone and be like, oh yeah, I saw that movie, almost like it's a badge of honor. Like, hey, I watched The Exorcist. Yeah, that's right, I'm tough, almost. And sometimes I think that's the case. It's just, there's so many different reasons that we love horror, and at the core of it, there's so many different ways to achieve it. Something like The Exorcist or Bone Tomahawk, like I mentioned before, they're really slow burns of a movie that lead up to these big horrifying conclusions. That's part of what makes it so frightening is the suspense, and that's a tough thing to do because you are just trying to build up to something, and if what you're building up to doesn't pay off, you are going to have a furious audience. And then there's the horror movies that are these constant, nonstop, trying to keep you disturbed a little bit, like I was mentioning before, it's the Saw movies. I never understood why there were some people who were just so, like, anti Saw. Do not get me wrong, they're by no means Shakespeare or Oscar winning films, but for the most part, they're okay. They, especially the first few, were pretty interesting, and they managed to at least give us some interesting characters while we watched absolutely brutal things happen. And I mean, again, even if you don't like horror movies, there's something to appreciate with something like Saw, or a movie I saw recently called Would You Rather, where you just get to watch in fascination about the kind of things the human mind can come up with. And I mean, horror is this exploding right now. I mean, we've had really big horror movies come out this year with stuff like Green Room was a pretty big one. Not a lot of people have heard of it, but it's hugely critically acclaimed. Last year we had movies like The Gift and The Visit, all kinds of different, horror type movies. And of course we have horror TV. There's the American Horror Story franchise, which, I mean, let's be honest, the fifth season was kind of terrible. But even so, I mean, everything else. Well, I'll talk about the fifth season another day. But yeah, people love horror. They just love it. It's this thing everyone likes to gush about, and that's why I'm making this video, is because I want to gush about it. It's influenced Lord knows how many people. It's just such a fascinating genre. There's so many things that go into horror. So for me, I guess what I'm trying to say with this video, and what I'm going to try and wrap up real quick, is just that horror is a bizarre genre with so many different options and so many different kind of things that you can get into. It really is amazing. It really is the one genre that I think anyone can get into it, anyone can understand, because fear is a universal thing. So, I mean, if you like horror movies, you probably have someone else in your family who does too. It's a perfectly natural thing. It's not disturbing to like horror. It's not disturbing to think of these things. And I don't think there should be by any means a taboo on horror. It's just a fascinating, awesome genre.